Hello and welcome. My name is Samantha Drawley, and I'm a manager at Novaspace, where I lead the direct-to-device and IoT market intelligence report. I'd like to thank you for joining us today for this webinar in the GSOA webinar series. I'm delighted to be here with such a strong panel to unpack the opportunities and challenges around direct-to-device satellite connectivity. We'll be exploring how business models, technology, regulation, and partnerships are shaping the path from trials to commercial services. I'll start with a brief introduction of our panelists here today. I'm joined by Omar Case, founder and CEO of OQ Technology, Gianluca Rodolfi, Chief Commercial Officer at Sateliot, Ryan Johnson, Senior Director of Global Market Access and Government Affairs at Viasat, and Dan Dooley, Chief Commercial Officer at Link Global. As we look at direct-to-device services, this has been a hot topic in the industry and in the news for several weeks and months. There's been a lot of momentum in the market with the commercialization of services, first seen with Starlink and T-Mobile earlier this year. We're also seeing strong traction across B2B markets, and we will dive further into that, looking at which business and enterprise use cases are most interested in D2D and IoT services. And lastly, we're seeing a lot of strategic market attraction with the advancement of several different approaches to entering and operating in the market with partnerships, JVs, in addition to the fact that the spectrum game is also changing. Previously, we've been seeing operators choose either the MSS or the terrestrial spectrum path, and now we are seeing the potential of convergence of those two paths, and that's another topic we will dive into further. All right, so without further ado, we'll get right into it. The first question we have for the panelists today are, from a consumer perspective, will the value proposition of direct-to-device services be marketed as emergency only, a premium connectivity feature, or as a mainstream coverage extension? And I'll let Dan get us started on that topic.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. As you said, my name is Dan Dooley. I grew up in the mobile network operator space, to give you all a little context. So I come from the background of Sprint and AT&T, and so I have a very mobile network operator view of the world. I'm new to satellite the last 5 years with Link. And I think what the holy grail is for direct-to-device is eventually that consumers don't need and don't even understand whether they're under satellite or under terrestrial. They just know that they have great connectivity from T-Mo or AT&T or Verizon, and they just see themselves as having more connectivity in more different places. It's a journey. It's going to take a while to get there. You're going to need a lot of different spectrum assets to be able to get what people want in the demand they want. But essentially, you're going to go from where we are today, which is really betas, trials, narrowband, small data, SMS. But eventually, you'll get to the point where, especially outdoors, there's an indoor-outdoor conversation as well as a rural, city conversation. But eventually, you'll get to where there's a very complementary view between MNOs using terrestrial spectrum in dense urban applications and using supplemental coverage from space in a lot of the rural places. But I do see it as a mainstream product eventually. It's going to take a lot more satellites. It's going to take a lot more spectrum. But I think the path is clear.
Great, thanks for sharing. And Ryan, I don't know if you want to jump in there and share some of your thoughts, maybe from Viasat's perspective.
Sure, thanks. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Certainly, I agree with what Dan said. At the end of the day, it's about consumers and the connections, the connectivity that they want. I think most consumers are less interested in what the connection is, 4G, 5G, satellite, Wi-Fi, whatever. It's just that it has to work well, and work whenever they need it. Some of the options and the deployments are going to be driven by MNOs, though. They'll have specific needs depending on the country and the use case. So I think when you look at places where MNO networks may have difficulties, right, whether that's rural and underserved areas or after a natural disaster, or even in an urban setting when there's an overwhelming use of the mobile network, we'll see what the appetite for them and for consumers will be. But then also, I think you're going to see some different approaches come out in the market, not just driven by MNOs, but also by some enterprise applications for industrial IoT, agricultural services, where they may need more bandwidth and more than just incidental coverage when they're outside of the sort of the terrestrial extensions of the network.
Absolutely. And shifting the conversation a little bit more to IoT and the enterprise use case sector. So, what type of use cases do we see prevailing in this market, whether it be agriculture or logistics? We've seen some testing of first emergency responders. So, from an IoT perspective, what will see the most immediate benefit from NTN enabled direct to device connectivity and why? And maybe Omar, OQ has been exploring several different IoT use cases, so you could get us started on what you're seeing in the market today.
Thank you very much, Sumaya. So first, just to give an intro, so OQ is the world's first LEO D2D 5G satellite connectivity provider. When we launched our service back in 2024, last year, we currently provide D2D IoT service, but we will be launching also a D2D text messaging service by end of 2026. And our service is delivered over our own MSS S-band spectrum globally, where we have landing rights in EMA, APAC, and also in South America. And we have carrier-grade core networks where we can operate flexibly between private networks, operators, but also MNOs. And the highlights also for OQ this year, where we first connected for first time in the world over an NB-IoT link, a drone from Airbus to our LEO satellites, but also managed to transmit an image from a camera on the ground over NB-IoT link to our satellites using MSS S-band. And that actually brings me to the use cases that we see where mainly, for example, if we look at the energy sector, critical infrastructure, but also agricultural, logistics, and utilities. For example, we have a customer in Middle East, one of the largest oil and gas companies, where we provide connectivity for monitoring pipelines, oil pipelines, water pipelines across areas where the cost to put fiber or deploy terrestrial cell towers is much more expensive than using satellite connectivity. And this is where we come into the game, that if the cost of not having connectivity is more than having an IoT connectivity over a satellite, this is where the use case comes in. Plus also outside the oil and gas industry, like for example in agriculture for crop monitoring, cattle tracking, and also environmental monitoring. These are the use cases that we see a lot. And also monitoring of critical infrastructure such as bridges, dams, or having a backup communication network in case the main communication network is not available. So such use cases is what you see. And final, of course, tracking, asset tracking, whether it's on land or in the sea, is one of the obvious use cases for satellite IoT.
Thank you, Omar. And Gianluca, maybe, from Satelia's perspective too, also with the European focus, where do you see the IoT use case being most prevalent in which industries particularly?
Well, I mean, first of all, hello to everybody, and thanks for having me on this discussion. Here at Sateliot, well, as you know, we are very focused on a standard solution, where basically we want to connect the IoT cellular devices of the world to satellite without modification of the hardware to the Release 17. So we enable a kind of ecosystem already exists. What we are seeing now is that the biggest take up is on logistic. Big thing is in logistics, so assets that are moving basically everywhere. Our constellation is a polar orbit, so we cover 100% of the planet. So it's very important to have a coverage everywhere. As we know, 20% of the planet has cellular coverage, 80% is not. So this idea of smoothly moving from one network to the other is super important. I would say that secondary we see a lot in agriculture, which is including livestock and crop. a lot of maritime with the the tracking, the follow-up of the containers. So that's quite diverse, but you can go to very small ones where you basically you need to follow the hives and the bees and so on. So you have basically all type of use cases that are quite interesting.
Absolutely. And Dan and Ryan, you mentioned this a little bit with your intro in terms of seeing, mainstream coverage for D2D services and looking really at the mobile network operator and satellite operator relationship. So that model is evolving, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on D2D and seeing whether, roaming wholesale capacity plans or premium bundled plans, or even retail plans, gaining traction, and what model do we see prevailing, or is it just, MNO dependent? And Dan, I think it'd be great for you to share your thoughts with Link, having several global operator agreements already in existence.
Yeah. I think the mobile network operators are testing the water with, consumers, first responders, businesses to see how it'll play out. And I think we're again at the beginning of the journey. So what today mobile network operators like T-Mo or Rogers here in Canada, what they're offering to subscribers is really a messaging only beginning service, right? A dip your toe in the water service. And so they're really, from a mobile network operator point of view, trying to understand the user experience and make sure the user experience is tied to the value that they're bringing. Now, that being said, I'm a T-Mobile subscriber here in the States, from my days at Sprint. And I can easily purchase through their app the satellite connection for $10 a month. So it'll be very interesting to see as that evolves, how much uptake they'll get. I think mobile network operators, I think, are generally coming to the area where they want to offer this service as if you're a postpaid, very premium service, you get it included as a way to retain you, as a way to upsell customers from a lower plan to a higher plan. But if you're in the top plan, I think it's generally thought that you would get this satellite service without any additional costs. I think you'll always have the ability, if you have a lower plan, to be able to buy a day pass or a week pass or a monthly subscription, kind of like you do today in roaming. But I think really the mobile network operators are testing the water, or they're in the betas. It will get to the next inflection point when operators are able to offer data, because that's when I think really from a consumer point of view, that will be a really big value driver to the equation versus just a minimal connectivity texting, which people like today because they stay connected and they feel safer and they're able to do things that they're not able to do. But obviously, when you can get to a more mainstream product like a data or a voice product, then I think the value to you and I go up, and I think mobile network operators will be able to extract the value at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've also seen that with the introductory offers, being first in beta phases and free. And then the evolution of that is either, on a monthly basis, or having the opportunity to upgrade to this premium plan and have that encompassed in it. So that is exactly what we're seeing with the introductory services today. And happy to hear other thoughts from the panelists on this.
Yeah, happy to comment on this. So, I mean, at the end, on the medium long term, I mean, nobody knows, okay, what's going to happen and so on. But our intuition is that out of coverage, well, you have different realities, okay? No, the world is much bigger than US, so you're very focused on the US and what's happening in the US, but the world is much bigger. And our satellites, when they move, actually, they just spend around 3% of their time over the US. Okay, 97% of the time they are something over something else. So we need to monetize it also in other places. Our intuition is that when you are out of coverage, you're basically looking for basic connectivity. Okay, we don't think that watching Netflix when you're out of coverage, or HBO, to be fair, or whatever Walt Disney Channel, it's the main application or the key application. because bandwidth is always still going to be quite a rare or expensive, if it's much less than before, but still it's quite much more expensive than if you have the terrestrial network. We also see that nobody is making money now with this connectivity. T-Mobile has been giving it basically included in the premium all you can eat. AST, we don't see the service yet, so I don't know who's making money of it and who will be willing to pay. There was last week in Paris an analysis Maison presentation where they were explaining that following them, there can be an increase in the revenues and the RPU due to NTN on the MNOs. If I recall correctly, it was around 3%, but mainly on enhancing the retention more than up spending. So I think the key thing here is how can we make it very affordable for the basic services that sorry to call it basic, because maybe sending a message is not basic. Maybe it's a lot if something happens, you are out of coverage. But for what we would call basic messages or connectivity, make it very affordable, universally available. That's a little bit our view.
Yeah, absolutely. And affordability on the service front, but also on the handset and IoT device front is also important and a topic that everyone is discussing as well as the services roll out. So maybe to the whole group, what pricing or business models will move us beyond this early adoption phase to true mass market?
I guess I'll take a shot at that. So today, between the satellite operators and the mobile network operators, there's a few different ways of people are monetizing it today. Satellite operators are charging per subscriber in some areas, right? So they'll say, "Hey, how many subscribers do you have? I'll give you access to the LEO constellation. You can use it. You can monetize it, whatever. If you want to monetize it through churn reduction or through getting other customers to come onto your network, great. If you want to add revenue to your existing customers, you want to upsell, however you want to do it, you pay by the subscriber. There's also pay by the usage, right? So basically, you'll put down, complementary cell sites within a geography, and whoever uses those, you count up the minutes, megs, and messages like roaming, right? And you pay by that. And then there's also the revenue share model, right? Which is essentially, okay, if I do charge somebody a $10 a month connectivity, then I will get X percentage back. And again, that last model is demands that the subscriber signs up and pays extra for that to happen, where the previous two models are more ubiquitous because they allow mobile network operators to extract value, not just in increasing revenue, but also in reducing their capital that they need to put into the network because they have base stations in the sky, or the fact that they don't have to pay roaming to other people, or they just have happier customers or customers that used to be from a competitor to themselves. So there's a lot of different models. I think eventually you'll get to the model which will be more of like a tower-based model, right? Because these are cell towers in space. So essentially, you might get to the point where when there's enough capacity, enough providers, where people are then saying, okay, pay by the capacity, and then the MNOs would use the capacity the way they want to use the capacity, and whether that capacity is on their own spectrum or on MSS spectrum, again, that can be a future thing, but essentially, those are the three models that are in play today.
I would like to add also to what Dan said. I mean, what we believe in, like for consumers, the winning model is really having bundled pricing, like basic D2D fallback included in the standard mobile plan, of course, with optional tiers for always on or higher performance. But this comes also the role of working with enterprise or that has operations, let's say, in remote areas, sending people out of coverage, also on private networks, and so that's one side. The other side is how that relationship with MNOs will evolve, how this partnership will allow that D2D adoption. I think like the partnership will just shift from having roaming agreements to having true integration with satellites becoming really the invisible extension of the mobile networks. And of course, here comes again, having a flexibility in the model in terms of wholesale capacity for MNOs, plus the ability to bundle premier pricing with add-ons for consumer. That where we see could work. And today we're working both with MNOs, with enterprise customers, offering the service over MSS band. And then, eventually these will evolve and you'll have like different applications for these two different track sites of delivering the service.
Thanks, Omar. And maybe I'll just share an audience question that came through the pipeline that you touched upon, but I'll let the other panelists chime in if they have anything else to add. So a question from Simon Watts on will service plans be created to allow high priority data to be carried, such as critical national infrastructure related or safety of life?
Absolutely. I think, I mean, I think for government infrastructure, defense, I mean, let's take a scenario where, let's say you have a cyber attack where a whole cellular network is down. You need to broadcast important emergency messages to citizens, to people, or there's critical infrastructure affected. I mean, that insurance of having that capability to be transmitted, even from not inside the country, from a station outside over satellite, is very important. And that's completely, I would consider a premium type of service for government, for example.
Yep. And any other panelists want to add on to that?
And I think what you're seeing today, sorry, Ryan, what you're seeing today is the early adopters of this basic, messaging connectivity that's out in the market today are first responders. Exactly what Omar's saying. Those are the folks that, will pay the extra for it, want that connectivity, and will be prioritized. So I do think everybody understands that, they're sort of the premium customer for this event right now. And you and I that want to send my wife a picture of me fishing or tell her I'm going to be late, is secondary. But with enough capacity, all of that will happen, and eventually you'll get to data and eventually you'll get to video. I do think so. But yeah, first responders, government assets, that's a key part of the early adoption of direct to device.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
so with all operators, entering the market kind of in similar times, but of course different phases. One question that comes up a lot is, differentiation and value proposition. So, several operators ready to launch. How are your solutions, whether technically or commercially, differentiated in a potentially crowded market? And yeah, maybe Gianluca, you could get us started on that with Steliot's differentiation.
Yeah, well, few things. So first of all, we have our own constellation. Okay, some others they have, some others they're not on the competitive landscape. We think that affordability is a key one because if you want really to make it available for any type of use cases, could it be phones, could it be sensors, need to make it super affordable. And so we work on it. We are capex light. And then, as I said before, we believe in standards, so not all the solutions are standard. And we've been seeing actually lately, I mean, we work on the standard since 5 years, so we are the first company to launch the 5G standard satellite. We were in the 3GPP on the new space. We were since the beginning, 2019 and so on. And we are seeing now the big guys or the ones that have been announcing so far D2D with the telecom operator using the frequency, putting a lot of money in. I mean, these are news now. AST finally, probably yesterday, had the final purchase of the Ligado 40 megahertz in the US and Canada. You have SpaceX purchasing the frequencies of EchoStar. So when you look at it, it looks like you're going to purely MSS is the way to go. We are there. We have a nice footprint of frequencies. So, by the way, we see the market, which is huge. So competition is also good, but we feel that we are quite different in terms of on the offering, the pricing, and the fact that you don't need to change your device.
Yep. And Ryan, maybe you can complement that with Viasat's strategy as well.
Well, yeah, I think our focus is on providing a unified effort with a real full ecosystem approach that includes satellite operators, device manufacturers, service integrators, and MNOs, all kind of driving the market adoption forward. We're favored in this moment with a real inflection point in end-to-end use cases. So we've got open standards, particularly the 3GPP standards, existing MSS spectrum with clear rules on how to use it, and this emerging ecosystem for collaborative innovation, along with some new commercial models, means people are going to try a lot of new use cases. And so this feels to me a lot like the beginnings of the commercial internet, where standards came out and everybody found their niche where they could compete. Some companies got really big doing that. Some stayed niche, but did something better than anybody else. And it's given us the digital reality that we rely on today. I think Viasat's, a proof point for that, if you will, is a partnership in Brazil that we have with a local antenna manufacturer that is able to design something just for the logistics industry in Brazil that hybridizes cellular and satellite L-band connectivity. It's a company called GuardianSat. We've told that story before, so you can certainly look that up. But it's a great example of where this is going. But overall, it's going to be an advanced MSS strategy that drives the whole industry forward. I think it kind of goes. It includes D2D, but goes beyond that. It's the next generation of safety services at air and at sea, direct to vehicle communications and Internet of Things that are all going to fit there. And finally, just to say, I think it's about identifying the viable technical solutions that are going to be the best fit for purpose. So hybrid networks that use the benefits of both GEO and LEO are going to be part of that reality for sure.
Thanks, Ryan. And maybe Omar, I'll give you a chance to jump in before we tackle regulatory and standards, which is another big topic for today.
Yeah, sure. I just quick. I think it's really main four pillars here. Is like first mover advantage. Like we were the first to launch the D2D over LEO IoT service with our LEO satellites, and we're not just talking about like trials. Like today, you can come and buy a commercial service, and it will be deployed together, even with the solution if needed. Spectrum strength. So we have a priority MSS S-band spectrum. There's been a lot of happening in that arena recently. We also have a presence in the upper C-band that's heavily discussed now, also for D2D, which all gives us like protected and scalable IoT and D2D service, whether it's text, voice in future. And of course, having, let's say, a flexible architecture cores that can work in connection with private networks, enterprise, or MNOs. And I agree with Ryan with what he said. Like at some point, everyone has to specialize certain verticals where you go. This is your strength, certain areas. So that's where I see ourselves. What sets us apart and from the others.
Thanks, Omar. And Dan, any final thoughts on differentiation and value proposition?
I'm happy that at the end we don't think exactly the same because we don't think we need to specialize on something. We think we are a generalist on giving connectivity, and we leave our customer to be very specific on their own verticals.
Yep, absolutely. And then maybe Dan, any parting thoughts on that?
I just think this is a gigantic opportunity. Like from a satellite point of view, and again, I don't come from the satellite industry, but when you're talking about $1 trillion wireless business, you're in a whole different arena than providing satellite services to remote or use cases, right? I mean, the use case in our world in the MNO is just everybody. There's 5.5 billion devices out there. All of these devices are able to connect to a satellite today. Those devices, eventually will need more spectrum, right? This is the MSS. Eventually that'll happen. But we're lucky in some of these Western places in Europe and US and Canada where we have great connectivity. But as you guys have said, it needs to be cost effective because the places that really need this are the lower ARPU, less connected areas around Africa, the Yukon, and you're gonna need a solution that works on all the devices, and they're not gonna buy the latest. Pixel 9 or iPhone 14, right? You're going to have a lot of these. You're going to have 2G for a while in these areas, right? So really backward compatible and standard needs to happen as well because these are very expensive constellations to put up, right? These are billion-dollar constellations that we're all putting up. And so they're going to have to be sort of chameleon. They're going to have to work in 2G, 4G, 5G. They're going to have to work on old devices via terrestrial spectrum. They have to work on new devices via MSS spectrum. And I think there's room for everybody. And as long as it's all standardized, as the rest of the panels are saying, I think it'll be a general win for the rest of the industry.
Yeah, certainly. And at this point, I'll share another question that we have from the audience, sort of related in terms of differentiation. So the question from Richard Haas is, how can IoT focused D2D providers differentiate themselves from SpaceX's offering, which also offers IoT services?
Well, sorry, I think it goes well on what we've been saying before. I mean, nobody knows, okay, again, so let's not, but our understanding is specifically not SpaceX, but Starlink are very focused on D2D to phones and not necessarily optimized on IoT. We are working on standards, which is narrowband IoT. Narrowband IoT is focused on messaging, it's focused on low consumption of the batteries, mainly battery-based sensors. And there's a very high differentiation with the LTM and high bandwidth type of applications where Starlink marginally, because not their focus, might be giving a solution.
Thanks for sharing. And as you know, it's been mentioned several times already throughout the conversation, but maybe we can focus on it a bit more with technology and standardization. So 3GPP releases from 17 through to 19 when we first saw the inclusion of NTN, laying the foundation for NTN IoT and broadband. So the criticality of standardization, how important is that for ensuring interoperability across devices, networks, and constellations?
So I think if I may take this first, like standards really very critical for interoperability. I mean, without that, then we'll end up with the same model that have always existed, where you have proprietary networks. So having a standard would allow D2D to scale beyond the niche markets. Otherwise, adoption will stall. And that's why we embraced early on 3GPP standard when we were started back in 2016. Even at that time, release 17 didn't exist. We looked at the early releases, how to make MBIT work over satellite, and then fast forward, and with many contribution to 3GPP or NTN technology and D2D, I mean, we have release 17 now, where you can seamlessly connect to existing devices, no need of any specialized hardware or modification. And of course, this standard first approach allowed us to work directly with our customers and existing mobile operators at the ecosystem rather than creating silos.
Thanks, Omar. Ryan, maybe did you want to add anything to that with what Viasat's sort of seeing in their MSS strategy as well?
Yeah, well, I really agree very much with Omar. I think standards are the secret sauce that's going to make this thing really work and be able to scale to a point where we're going to address some of the market size that Dan mentioned. Proprietary networks just, I think, aren't going to get us there. So it's that availability of standards that's going to allow new entrants to get in and to innovate, to attract capital and financing, and to build out an ecosystem that also regulators and policymakers will understand how to apply to their administrations.
Yeah, absolutely. And related to that, we actually have an audience question too from Richard Haas again. So for the upcoming 2 gigahertz MSS authorization in Europe, how should the European Commission decide who gets access to this after 2027?
Well, there's an obvious answer probably. I mean, they should be quite open to give opportunity to many other telecom, satellite telecom operator to be present in Europe. As we know, now they are on the hands of two companies that ended up being basically American or US owned. So I think this should be shared with the telecom operators, especially the ones that are based in Europe.
Thanks, Gianluca. Any other thoughts from the other panelists?
I think, and speaking as also a European operator in Luxembourg with early access to MSS SPAD, which because of the two companies in Europe, it's kind of difficult to, we're looking what will happen in 2027. There was a consultation and we provided a response to the EU about it. I think we have to look into the sovereignty aspect where if Europe want to have a sovereign infrastructure for critical communication over satellite, you will need an European constellation and European infrastructure that can deliver this, and spectrum is an important aspect of that. However, we should not forget also, like companies did put infrastructure for services, other service that is using also this spectrum. There are people using that. So it really comes down to the value that you can bring to people, having tangible like implementation of that and usage of the spectrum. It's not being warehoused, it's being used effectively. This is actually strikes a balance like between the existing players, the new ones. Sharing also is very important, having like a shared part of the band between for D2D and narrowband players on that spectrum, because in the end that fosters innovation, at the same time allows companies to deliver service that they promise on, instead of just warehousing spectrum, using it very little. So I think all these factors should play in the end in the decision makers' final decision.
I think it's a really tough question, because I think it's a very valuable piece. Again, from an MNO point of view, it's a very valuable piece of spectrum. And typically, continental Europe connectivity levels are really, really high, right? So there's not, they're very lucky in continental Europe to have connectivity almost everywhere. So there's a need to have D2D services in the future for disaster, for filling in the gaps, for filling out the small rural places that still exist, for the maritime, stuff like that. And what's probably clear is that terrestrial spectrum is probably not the best use of spectrum in continental Europe because very small countries, a lot of people, a lot of borders. And so this piece of S-band is a critical asset that Europe needs to figure out how to best use it, because it probably is the beachfront property for getting into D2D services eventually onto the continent of Europe. So it needs to be thought of. It needs to have priorities and regulations to allow, I think I agree with the other panelists, everybody to have use of it. But it's a really important piece, especially for continental Europe, to bring D2D to continental Europe. Otherwise, Europe will be the last people to kind of see this. You'll see it happening in other countries first. But I'm not sure there's a clear answer exactly of how the best to divvy it up across countries, across organizations. We as well put in a response, but it's a really good question.
Yeah.
Gianluca, did you want to add to that?
No, I actually agree with them actually.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with Dan with the statement that using IMT bands is not going to be a solution for D2D, like standardized band like MSS S-band or other upcoming ones like upper C-band is essential because you have harmonization, you have standard. I mean, imagine your satellite where you get certain band in one country from mobile operator, then another one in another country, and another one. You'll end up with different
Or
antennas
the way it works today with roaming.
Exactly.
Right?
You'll have like
Exactly.
a spaceship, not a satellite with
Yeah,
many
it
antennas.
works like roaming. But
So, and I
but
think
then
space.
the question is then how do you then take that S-band across borders? What does Belgium get versus Luxembourg versus France versus Germany? Like it's a hard question. I don't want to be, in that room making that decision. It's a hard question, but it needs to get done. It needs to be standardized. It needs to be open to people. And I do think that's the only way that D2D is going to come to the continent of Europe.
Yep, absolutely. And in that realm, global harmonization already proving to be difficult in terms of conversing about how we foresee that spectrum being used and shared. So do you guys believe that D2D can still thrive under fragmented national and regional regimes?
I do because it's like standard roaming. So, when I land in Germany, my phone automatically connects to the best network, depending on what my mobile network operator wants me to do, whether that's a satellite network or a terrestrial network. It doesn't really matter. So, I don't think you need to have a worldwide standard. I think, today we have in the terrestrial world of MNOs, you and I travel all around the globe and our phone works out of the gate perfectly. I think that's the way it is. There's a preferred roaming list in all of our devices. And it'll go down the list depending on what your MNO wants you to see, and whether that's a satellite or terrestrial, the phone's not going to know. The phone is tricked to think that the satellite is actually a terrestrial tower next to the device. That's the beauty of it. So I don't, I think in Europe is a little different, as we said before, because of the smaller countries, but traveling between, I'm in Canada today, come from Canada, North America, and, Europe, my device works everywhere. I don't see how it's going to care whether it's a quote satellite connection or a terrestrial connection. It's just going to see a connection to a base station.
I might have a slightly different opinion. I think harmonization is clearly better for us. I mean, it's not always possible, and so there are times when we'll have slightly different frequency use plans, but it should be kind of the driving goal for us. The regulatory regimes in each country need to prioritize national interests and ensure sustainable markets. But if those issues can be addressed, then harmonization, I think, is preferable. Globally, we've seen the harmonization of the L and S bands generally for MSS, and I think that kind of demonstrates it, right? We've seen billions of dollars invested into a variety of networks and a bunch of startups to use some of that satellite capacity that are going to bring those bands and more services to the market. And we're seeing more capital go into those bands all the time. So I think harmonization is attractive for capital.
I think that's right on the MSS side because it's not owned spectrum. Don't take this the wrong way, but like MNOs, we paid a lot of money for our spectrum. We own our spectrum, right? So that necessarily doesn't need to be harmonized, but certainly for MSS, where you have landing rights and all the, the coordinations and all that stuff. I agree with that. But as a base form of in Africa, going between South Africa, Zimbabwe, Egypt, whatever, you can connect terrestrially, without standardization today. But I would agree on the MSS side because there's so much coordination, and unless you're going to be auctioning it off like we did in the terrestrial world, you're going to need to have some harmonization.
And then maybe just on the technical frontier, so we had an audience question discussing, terrestrial and non-terrestrial interworking. So from Julius Robson, does terrestrial networks and non-terrestrial network interworking just work with regular roaming architecture, or are new approaches needed?
Well, today, the LEO satellites that I'll just take SpaceX because it's a working, it's a working example today. So today in 8 or 9 countries, the phones that those operators launch the service automatically uses the preferred roaming list and switches back between satellite and terrestrial all the time. So yeah, there's nothing. It's because it's standardized and there's standard 3GPP roaming protocols. Where a foreign device and a foreign network connects, like when I land in Europe, my phone is a foreign device and a foreign network and it automatically connects. It's no different in what the LEO providers are doing on the D2D side, specifically SpaceX Link AST.
No comments.
Any other thoughts on that one? Another topic that came through just similar to that on information sharing. I think this is an interesting one. So looking at security guarantees. So this is from Sule Bubakari. The question is, what security guarantees can you give to governments and administrations in terms of consumer rights and data protection? And how will you guarantee that the technology is controllable?
Well, I think if the service is being provided as an extension of an MNO's service and the contract with the end user is with the MNO, then a lot of the regulation is on the MNO. So that's pretty straightforward. They can then apply that to the satellite operator or any other intermediary, the same way they do with data centers, right? Which is through contractual obligations more than direct regulation from the state to that sort of tertiary actor in the value chain. If it's a service being provided directly, then that's something that the service provider has to take into consideration and demonstrate how they're going to meet the needs of that particular regime. And the rules around the world are complex and different. And so there's not probably a one size fits all answer for that. So it'll have to be addressed market by market.
And another question that's anonymous that came through, also related to data information sharing and cybersecurity. In this new paradigm of D2D connectivity, where do you see cybersecurity impacts on terrestrial network and non-terrestrial network communications?
So I think the satellite industry increasingly takes cybersecurity very seriously. As time has gone on, we've demonstrated that we're more and more integrated to the critical networks that make the world work. And so operators today invest a lot in cybersecurity for the network that they offer. I don't think that it's very different, frankly, than what MNOs do. If there's a specific cybersecurity standard or compliance obligation in a market, then it's incumbent on the value chain to pull together the solution for that. Kind of like what I said a minute ago, if it's being done through the MNO, then they should probably take the lead on that and ensure that their providers meet the needs and comply. If it's the satellite operator directly in the market, then they've got to demonstrate that compliance.
Just, I mean, also to comment on what Ryan said, indeed, with respect to working with MNOs, then that is already something has to be followed. But the experience we got when going to deploy a private NTN network integrated to a TN network of a large enterprise, we had to go through a lot of security standards, whether it's on the IT, whether it's how the data is treated on the satellite, the SIM cards used and the geofencing, who is in control in the end. Like we have developed like a fully secure private network where the core is also residing at the client infrastructure data center, because even we do not have access to the data that the satellites exchange between their assets and data center when it passes over that country. So it's the highest level of security required if you are deploying, let's say, a private NTN network with an enterprise, because they also don't want to go through a public network or a teleport outside the country or even outside their own, let's say, fields and premises. So, and it plays a big role, yeah, that's something which I would say just to be compliant, it took us a full year just to be compliant with all the requirements that we needed to be a vendor and deploy that network.
Absolutely, and sovereignty is also another important piece of the puzzle too. Whether we're talking D2D, IoT, or other SATCOM broadband applications as well. So on the same topic, a question from Professor Rakesh Mehrotra: how do you foresee resolution of regulatory and national security issues in satellite D2D?
So Maya, maybe I'm not directly answer this question, but when you ask the question, you mentioned something important like security also plus sovereignty, which
Yeah.
is also relevant to the Europe spectrum question, is that, as you know, like every American operator is subject to the US Cloud Act. So at some point, if the European data is over a satellite network that's American, then that's US Cloud Act applies. And having a pure European infrastructure is also essential when looking into the spectrum and the service that European clients or governments could buy. Like, for example, here in Luxembourg, we operate the data and the core under a Tier 4 local Luxembourg data center. And it's subject to European regulation, European rules. And so that's also another factor, as you mentioned, the link between not just security, but sovereignty with respect to NTN.
Thanks, Omar. And I know we've spoken, about the dynamics in North America and Europe a lot. We have a question from Santiago Rivera, which speaks about the LATAM market. And the question is, what is required from governments and the industry for this service to be launched in the Latin American market? So maybe if anyone has insights more on the LATAM market.
Yeah, well, that's the region I spend the most of my time in, so maybe I'll take a stab at it. Well, for the use of MSS spectrum, most of that, particularly the LNS band spectrum, is already regulated and has been for quite some time in Latin America. There's some differences between tables of allocation on things like extended L band, but generally speaking, there's a harmonized approach, and there already are a lot of L band and S band services today. My own company, which acquired Inmarsat in 2023, has a long history of providing services. So that part of the regulation, the spectrum regulation for MSS, pretty well understood. What comes next, I think, is figuring out how contractual relationships with MNOs, for example, will be regulated, if at all, or what additional pieces might need to fall in place. But I'll tell you, we had our initial demonstration and sort of market entry in Brazil in April of this year for direct to cell and IoT services. So we've been trialing a lot of services around the region, always with the cooperation and interest of the regulators. So I think there's a lot of interest, but so far we haven't seen a lot of obstacles.
Yeah, I think I'll add to that. I mean, as far as direct to device within Latin America, it's very the same. Each country needs to determine their rules about terrestrial MSS, right? And Brazil's been very forward leaning. Anatel has got the sandbox. We were able to do the first, voice call in a place called Saluí in Brazil with one of the MNO partners there. We've done trials in Argentina, so it's coming to LATAM as well. It's a great area for direct to device, and I think the regulators are all actively looking at how they can support it. I think regulators tend to be forward leaning across the world in this because they understand that this is a new innovative technology that needs to be tried and needs to make sure that they germinate to be able to make sure that all of their subscribers will get connectivity. You think about Brazil, it's a very large country with the Amazon, a lot of disconnectivity there. And so Anatel's very forward leaning about, yeah, let's try it. Let's see how it happens. As long as it doesn't interfere with other operators, they're very forward leaning with it. So I think it's coming to LATAM faster than people might think.
Thanks, Dan. And I'll take another question from the audience. So this is from Shiza Baig. The question is, we already see strong technology readiness and clear use cases, and it's evident that these services will eventually become mainstream. However, adoption is still constrained by certain challenges. So from your perspectives, what role can service providers play in accelerating this expansion and making these solutions accessible at scale?
Service providers, meaning like the mobile network operators, is that what you're thinking about? Or service providers like satellite providers? Which part of the food chain? Just
Yeah,
to
I
be
would think MNO, well, I'm gonna speak for, but maybe MNOs and then also in the IoT enterprise landscape, whether there could be satellite or service providers, pardon me, to also accelerate that rollout.
Yeah. So I mean, you need three, for G2D, you need three basic things to happen, right? You need to have assets in the air that are able to have enough assets in the air that can connect you and I to a service that you and I understand, whether it's texting or light data or IoT or broadband. That's one. So the satellite companies of the world need to continue to get funded, continue to launch satellites, and continue to have the assets in the sky that can provide the network. From a mobile network operator point of view, to be able to then either allocate some of their quote, today terrestrial spectrum to get those legacy devices to work, or B, at work with the chipset manufacturers and the handset manufacturers to put in the MSS spectrum into the future devices. That's a way to get sort of the industry going. And then C, the MNOs need to be able to go to you and I as the consumer and allow us to onboard easily. Like we shouldn't have to sign up to arduous project of buying a new SIM card, or of buying a new phone, or of getting a new plan, right? We want to be able to, at a minimum, be able to go onto our app and and click on the satellite connectivity and add satellite to our plan, or frankly, it just gets included because mobile network operators need to provide connectivity everywhere. And so a lot of consumers are like, well, why am I paying for this? You should be paying for this. You're my mobile network operator. So I think it's going to take a lot of us, and it's going to take the governments, as we said before, to be able to make to have legislation that allows this innovative technology to come to market as fast as possible. It's a Rubik's cube of it, but you've seen all of that come together fairly quickly over the last year or two. That there's a real service provided to mainstream, on top of all the IoT services that are out there. There's a real mainstream service to you and I in 6 or 7 countries around the globe. So I think it's coming faster. It'll be really exciting to see how the next couple of years pan out.
Thanks for sharing, Dan. So we're coming close to the end of the session, so I'll end off with one a parting question, just discussing future-looking services and the roadmap for each one of your companies, and we can kind of take turns on this one. So to wrap up, looking ahead, what's your roadmap and timeline for commercial services over the next 12 to 24 months? And maybe Gianluca, we could start with you.
Yeah, happy to do it. So we'll be talking about LATAM. Okay, we're so very active in LATAM. So our service is available. We can start delivering services on standard release 17. We are licensed in many countries in LATAM. So in the next 12 or 14 months, our focus is on making these customers enabled and being able to connect to our satellite constellation. I'm saying LATAM, but it can also be a part of Asia. It can be Australia. It can be many parts of Africa. So here we are, and that's our focus now, to focus on the commercial side. Meanwhile, in parallel, we are building the new satellites that we launch next year. So it's going to be an expanded, much more expanded, actually, constellation.
Thanks, Gianluca. I'll hand it over to you, Dan.
Yeah, so Link is, we like to say we invented the technology many, many years ago, the ability to connect a satellite moving at 8 kilometers a second, 500 kilometers above the Earth, to a unmodified device here on Earth. And so, when you provide a LEO constellation, it's global service by definition. So we are moving in a couple of phases. One is the initial build out, which would be light data, voice applications globally. And we believe that our satellites are able to handle all different types of spectrum, whether it's terrestrial spectrum or MSS spectrum. We believe that when you're putting an asset in the air for 10 years, you're going to want that asset to have as much connectivity, ways to connect as possible. So we believe that ours have both the satellite and MSS and the terrestrial capabilities in it, so that all 8 billion devices around the globe can be connected. And then we also are working we have our strategic partner, SES, who's one of our largest shareholders. And we believe that multi-orbit is a very important part of our strategy, not only connecting user devices on Earth to our LEO satellites, but also connecting those LEO satellites to MEO and GEO constellation so that you can gain things like persistent communication, sovereignty, getting the data down in each country without ground stations. So we're very excited about the next 4 or 5 years and really are trying to make it as cost effective but ubiquitous as possible.
Thanks, Dan. Omar?
Thank you very much. So I think today OQ is already delivering D2D IoT service commercially over our own S-band MSS with customers like in oil and gas, utilities, and logistics. Now, near term, by end of 2026, we will launch our D2D text messaging service to phones. And then long term, from there, we'll expand to voice services and eventually in future broadband connectivity, leverage also MSS S-band or future bands that come into the standard. And this is where we see ourselves and our roadmap.
Thanks for sharing. And Ryan, I'll have you end us off maybe with Viasat, but also the new JV.
Well, Viasat's already providing a lot of D2D services today, especially with regards to IoT, with direct services as well as distributors like Orbcomm and Mariota. Our first D2D emergency text was already in 2024 in the US. And as I mentioned earlier, D2D has already begun in Brazil in April of this year. And we'll have Mexico online in the next few weeks. So I think handsets that can use this service are coming online. Clearly, those are still at the top end of the market right now, but they'll become more mass market very soon. And the commercial partnerships are developing quickly that will include partnerships with MNOs as well as potential partnerships with other space network operators. It's just really a question of how we can get folks to have the technology in their hands as quick as possible and bridge the coverage gap once and for all. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for sharing. So that brings us to the end of today's discussion. Any questions that we didn't have time to answer during the live program will be addressed in writing and posted alongside the video on the GSOA website, provided they are relevant to today's topic. You're also able to rewatch a recording of this webinar as well as previous ones on GSOA's YouTube channel and their website, gsoasatellite.com. Please join us again in the next event, which will be in October, and the registration link for that has been posted to the chat and is also available on the GSOA website. I'd also like to give a big thanks to our panelists today for sharing their valuable insights and to our audience for participating and asking very engaging questions. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. Thank you.